Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, where today I'm going to be talking about some palettes in my collection which to me speak fall. The sorts of palettes that I look at and I go, oh, that color story is so autumnal. Yeah, I've got quite a decent pile on my lap here and it's going to be a lot of fun. If you're new to my channel, hey, my name's Rachel. I'm a homeschooling stay-at-home mom. I love to play with colorful eyeshadow and I typically upload at least 3 videos a week, all kinds of colorful eyeshadow related content. If you are interested in seeing more of that, I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing. I did film this eye look and I'll link it down below in the description box if you're curious. Okay, so let's just dive right in because I have several palettes to go through today. First, probably the single most autumnal themed palette that I consider in my collection is the Flare palette from Ace Beauté. Let's look at this beauty. I love this color story. I think it is so beautiful. It is so inspiring to me. Literally every time I look inside this palette, I get 4 or 5 ideas right off the bat. I think it's beautiful and it's autumnal. It's just, even the words, you know, this is named pumpkin, this is firefly, cider, acorn. It is so autumnal, it's not even funny. This is the palette in my collection that I always think of first. When I hear the words fall themed palette, here we go. Now this is Ace Beauté's old formula, but I have been getting a lot of use out of this palette, even though it's, I guess, not as optimized as their new formula. It's been working just fine for me. It's nothing spectacular, but it's still pretty good and I love the color story. This is fall in a palette, love it. And then probably the next palette in my collection that is most autumnal inspired, to me anyway, is the At First Sight palette between ColourPop and Raw Beauty Kristi. I love this palette. I think it's beautiful. I love the packaging. I love the watercolor details. I love the inside colors. It's very rich and pigmented. When Kristi designed this palette, she actually took a little color picker in her computer software and she found pictures of the Pacific Northwest, which is where she lives, and she just chose colors out of nature and created this color story. It's beautifully done. I like that it's more matte heavy and not shimmer because I like to create a look with mattes and then add the shimmer on as like the final detail. These are the only 2 shimmers in the palette. We've got a very gold toned one and then a more silvery toned one, but they're both still grounded in a neutral kind of shade, and it's just a beautiful palette. Everything works together nicely. This is a pretty hard palette to find because it is beloved. It is limited edition, has been discontinued for a couple years now. Now and then you can find it on a secondhand site, usually overpriced, but that's been changing a bit in, I don't know, the last year or so, because now there are new palettes that are limited edition and hard to find. So those are becoming harder to get and these are becoming a little bit easier to find occasionally. But it is a beautiful autumnal themed palette. I love it. Just so you know, if you follow me on Instagram at Shimmers and Silver, whenever I find a great deal on Mercari or Poshmark, one of those apps, a deal that I know people are often looking for, like the Good Sport or the At First Sight palettes from ColourPop, Sweet Shop palettes from BH Cosmetics, things like that. If I ever find a really good deal, I will take a picture of it and put it in my Instagram stories. So make sure you're following me there if you care. Another ColourPop palette that I think is kind of fall themed is the Star Wars X Mandalorian, the Child palette. This is the first one that they released from their Star Wars collection. Since this release, they've had the Darth Vader palette, the Mandalorian palette, and then they had a whole Star Wars collection. I kind of like that palette. Now, we'll see if I ever get my hands on that one. But this is the Child, this little baby Yoda. He's as cute as can be, and it's just really adorable packaging. I did have this shade Shatter. I no longer have to be careful with the palette because that shade is gone. But anyway, this one I could see going either spring or fall. It's got so many of these lovely light tone greens, but then it's got some more grungier, deeper neutrals over here with this beautiful Float Your Crib shade, which is a sort of a gray toned mossy green. It's lovely. So I could see this palette going either direction. It's not super autumnal the way that Flare is, but I think that you could get some really lovely green and neutral kinds of looks with this palette. And then we have these beautiful shimmers that just work with all the colors in the palette. It's really nice. It's a really nice palette. Great quality. It's very cute. Let's talk about the Wilderness palette from Beauty Bay. This is a great palette. I understand why this palette was so hyped. Overall, I think this is a very autumnal themed palette. Yes, you've got some more cool tone blues up here, but then the rest of the palette is grounded earth tones, some grungy yellows and greens and reddish shades. We got some beautiful shimmers that work with everything. It's good Beauty Bay quality. As per usual, the darkest mattes don't love to blend on top of other colors, so you might want to start dark and work light. But overall, it's a lovely palette. It has a nice variety of light, medium, dark tones in shimmers and mattes, and you get this beautiful selection of colors from cool toned, warm toned, light, dark, blues and greens and reds and mustards. It's a really nice palette, very fallish. Is fallish a word? I don't think fallish is a word, but that's okay. I have another ColourPop palette in here. This is the Lush Live palette from ColourPop. I had trouble narrowing down my list here because I apparently I like fall themed palettes. This is Lush Life. This has always been one of my favorites. Such good quality, beautiful color story. Color story from the peachy corals, green, blue, and then more brownish tones over here. It's got a nice variety of mattes and shimmers. It's really good quality and you get some truly lovely looks from this one. This I could see again being autumnal, but also maybe more summery with the pops of greens and blue. But I think overall it's a little bit more fall themed because you've got these lovely oranges. Sort of this shimmer up here is kind of a winey champagne kind of blend. You know, it's a little bit pink, a little bit purpley, a little bit brownish. It's an interesting shade. And then of course you can deepen, just like the At Forest Sight palette, you've got the blues and greens incorporated as well, which if you were to knock out this part of the palette, it's certainly more fall themed. It's got a more autumnal feel to it because of all these deeper saturated tones. I think it's a beautiful palette. It's always been a favorite of mine. I'm trying to move through these kind of quickly so this video doesn't take forever. I have 3 left. I want to talk about the Saga of Freya Cat's Breath palette from Udenzai. This is a lovely palette. This one has this blue up here, which is kind of springy, you know, it's a Tiffany blue, but then the rest of the palette, maybe with the exception of this cat star shade here, the rest of the palette I think is a little bit more autumnal. We have a deep teal, we have these orangey, peachy tones, and then some shimmers and a brown matte with sparkle in it. I think overall this is kind of a fall palette because of the orange and green combination. They're just grounded, earthy sorts of tones, and then you've got these lovely shimmers that work with them. It's a beautiful palette. I love Udenzai formula. I love Udenzai packaging. Oh, I mean, overall, it's just a winner. And it has had one of my favorite, honestly, one of my only orange shadows until I recently got the Orange Sorbet palette from BH Cosmetics. And now I have a whole palette of beautiful orange shadows. But for a while, this was pretty much the only orange shadow that I had in my collection, like the only really good one. And I got a lot of use. The penultimate palette in this video is the Melt Amor y Mariposas palette. This is a beautiful palette. I love the color scheme. I never expected that I would get my hands on this because it's a pretty expensive palette, but I found it on Poshmark for $25. I was stoked. Okay, so let's look at these gorgeous colors. So beautiful, so rich and deep. Does have some lighter tones with this light green, a neutral over here, a lighter pink, a couple of more gray toned neutrals, but then I feel like the rest of the shades, with the exception of maybe this blue shimmer, are quite fall feeling. You know, they're darker, they're more pigmented, a little bit deeper, more saturated. Some just natural fall colors, you know, greens and orange and burgundy, just deeper colors. This is such a beautiful palette. I love the presentation. I love the formula. It is amazing. And then I love that this one has some really interesting pops. Like this orange is spectacular. This green, really the shimmers in this palette are stand out. They're so good. And you could transform any look, or you could just go more matte and have it be still dynamic because of the color options, but not as va-va-voom bright with a, you know, a hyper metallic shimmer. You can go either direction. There's so many choices. This is another palette that I find to be so inspiring. I look at it and I get all these ideas. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. And then finally, I want to talk about a pretty new palette in my collection. This is the Through My Eyes palette between ColourPop and I Love Sarahi. This palette's actually like 3 years old at this point. I believe it was released in 2019. I got it for $8 on Poshmark, and it was unused. Maybe it had been swatched once. I have gotten some nice use out of this palette so far. I think the color story is really unique. The teal, bronze, pinky kind of color story I think is really interesting. I haven't seen any other palette either before or after this one, not with this kind of color combination. It's very beautiful. You've got some interesting shades up here. Like this yellow is a great transition shade for all the other shadows. And then we've got a couple options in pink in different tones. This is more of a light bubblegum pink. This is peachy. Over here is more of a fuchsia. We've got a deep burgundy, aubergine kind of color. This is just, for me, this is a skin tone shade to blend out anything else. I think the shimmers are quite lovely. This, of course, is the standout shimmer, but we have a beautiful lighter ivory shimmer up here. Down here is a lovely rosy shimmer. And then this shade Flex is kind of interesting. It's sort of like a silvery brown, and it's a bit transformative. It's quite an interesting shimmer. I think that this palette is very interesting. It's been really fun to play with. I have a couple looks on my channel using it. Honestly, I have looks on my channel using, I think, all of these palettes. So if you're interested, just search, it's there. But this one to me does feel more fall. It's not quite as deep and saturated as some of the other palettes I've talked about that have the much heavier tones, but I think that with the mustardy bronzy color combination, you can get real fall vibes with an eyeshadow look using this palette, and overall it's just really beautiful. I like it a lot. So there you go. That is my video on fall themed eyeshadow palettes within my collection. I know some of these are more opinion based, like the Flare palette is obviously fall, but then the Child palette could go either way. And I don't know, it's my palette collection, it's my video, it's my channel. If it speaks fall to me, I included it in this video. I love to go through my collection and see what I've got and get re-excited or inspired by palettes that maybe I haven't played with in a while. I pull it out and I go, ooh. And you know, because I often have new palettes coming in, so now I can take an older palette that hasn't been used lately and pair it with something new and get a whole new spectrum of looks. It's just so exciting. I really enjoy playing with eyeshadow palettes. I enjoy looking at collections. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more. Remember to check out this eye look. It's linked down below if you're interested. And until I see you again in my next video, I hope you have a really nice day. Bye! Unique. Unique, the teal, mustardy, yellow, pink kind of. Unique, the teal, yellowy, pink sort of interesting. Why can't I form this sentence?